guess for now you've got the last night.
Well, Halloween was last night. We had a party. Not a single Dracula in sight. Which is strange, considering that this town plays such a big role in helping us actually know about it. Okay, in order for us to be able to understand what I just said, we need to make a distinction between two different people. The first was an actual historical person. His name was Vlad III Tepes of Wallachia. Voivod of Wallachia, he was a form of prince and a real historical figure. The other is the person who is the titular character within this book, Dracula, a Transylvanian vampire from the novel of Bram Stoker. Now, these two have been connected in the public mind for quite some time. We don't actually know where this comes from. We have actually no idea for why Bram Stoker used the name Dracula. It wasn't even Vlad Tepes' name. He was called Vlad Tepes. I forgot to mention one thing there. Vlad's real name wasn't Dracula, but his nickname, a name under which he was also known, was Dracula. Historians don't know why this is. They think that his father was part of an order of the dragon, but yeah, Dracula was his real name, but Dracula, no, that's just Bram Stoker. And he wasn't a count, he was a voivod. That's a different aristocratic title with some different signals. And he wasn't even from Transylvania, he was from Wallachia, which is a different part of the Balkans. In order for us to understand how it got to be, we need to take a look at the context of Balkan politics in the 15th century. See, there were two big political powers in the regions. One came from the south, that was the Ottoman Empire. The other came from the north, that was the Kingdom of Hungary. Wallachia is an area south of the Danube, a principality which Vlad ruled at the time. Transylvania, by the way, a part of the Kingdom of Hungary, where, yes, Tepes was born. But he ruled Wallachia, and he did so with a pretty iron hand. He was apparently quite cruel to his subjects. And also towards his enemies. He fought multiple wars. He fought against the Ottomans, he fought against the Moldovans, which were to his northeast, and kind of flipped between different sets of alliances in order to maintain a space between these two big powers. However, Vlad made one big miscalculation. Or rather, he just ran out of luck. Because at some point in the early 1460s, the King of Hungary, who had been at war with the Ottoman Sultan, made a peace with them. Now, that put Vlad in quite a tricky spot, because he had just fought a brutal war against the Ottomans in which he made vast use of his favorite method of punishment, impalement. You might also know him as Vlad the Impaler, which means that his fate now lay in the only man left who could back him, King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary. Now, because the Ottomans had just put forward their own candidate for the Wallachian throne, Vlad's own brother, Radu, Matthias said it's time to get Vlad out of the way. So when in the winter of 1462 he met Vlad to discuss, politics and military and everything, all that stuff that leaders discuss, he took Vlad prisoner, brought him back to Buda, what is now Budapest, the capital of Hungary, and imprisoned him. Only problem is here, the person who'd been paying for all of the Hungarian king's wars against the Ottomans was not the Hungarian king himself, it was the Pope in Rome, who saw this whole theater of war as not a war between kingdoms in which, there were different monarchies. He saw it as Christianity versus Islam, and this was an existential battle, and the Christians had to come on top, and now suddenly one Christian was imprisoning another Christian ruler in order to let a Muslim-sponsored ruler get on the throne of Wallachia. What the hell was going on here? Well, Matthias Corvinus couldn't just say, well, I just completed a pretty good peace treaty with the Ottomans. The Pope would stop sending him money, so he created a story. And according to this story, Vlad had been conspiring with the Ottomans to give them Wallachia. Not just Wallachia, to attack Hungary. The two countries would attack Hungary. Which makes no sense if you look at the historical record. I mean, if you look at the sources of the Ottomans, the Sultan was pretty much horrified at what Vlad had done to his men, impaling them on the stake. So many stakes, forests full of stakes, dead Ottoman soldiers everywhere. This was not someone who he was about to do a masterful treaty with. Rather, it appears that, it was a bit of a pastime for medieval rulers to falsify documents to send to allies to get them what they wanted. And this is apparently what Vlad fell victim to. He was just outmaneuvered in the game of politics. Now, there were a lot of European rulers that were outmaneuvered in politics like this, and most of them ended dead on the side of a road, or more precisely, killed somewhere in their palace. What made Vlad's story different is that, first of all, he wasn't killed, he was still alive. He was in Budapest in prison. And second of all, he had been blemished as a traitor, not just towards the Kingdom of Hungary, but also towards Christianity in general. And this gave artists an inroad. And those artists, well, they were all in Vienna.
I apologize.
I should probably qualify what I mean when I say artist. Now, see, artists, well, what do we think of when we think of Dracula? We think of the story. We think of, the vampire, we think of what he does. We don't think of the image that I've got right here on the screen again. We think of the story. So the people, the artists that I'm thinking of, are storytellers. And one of the most important changes to ever happen in storytelling had happened just over 20 years ago at the time of Dracula's arrest. And it all had to do with this man right here. This is a new a monument to him. His name is Johannes Gutenberg. And in the 15th century, just over 2 decades before Dracula was arrested, he'd invented the printing press. And this was everything to how we think of Vlad Tepes. Now, this wasn't done by Gutenberg himself. Gutenberg himself remained in Germany. This was done by a man called Ulrich Hahn, who in the 1450s had emigrated to Vienna and started a print shop there. And back then, Vienna didn't look like this, the stuff that you should be able to see there in the background there. Vienna looked a bit more, this thing behind me here. This is St. Rupert's Church. It's the oldest church still standing in Vienna. Perhaps a sign of how good the city would later have it, that one of the last medieval buildings still left standing is this place here. Really the only building that still looks like it more or less did in the Middle Ages. So this is the kind of space that Ulrich Hahn would have been working in. The place actually where he worked, we don't know where it is. There's no evidence leading to that, but just as a sense of what the town looked like when he was here. And as I said, Hahn had just been here for 10 years, or a bit more than 10 years maybe, when the story of Dracula, or the story of Vlad Tepes, began to enter the German-speaking world from the east, from German-speaking inhabitants of Transylvania. Now, Hahn took these stories, these loose anecdotes, and fashioned them together into one narrative. From our modern point of view, this story wasn't a really good story. It's more like a loose collection of anecdotes which then, end in this kind of like, ooh, he's still alive today, ooh. But it didn't have to be much, because it was one of the first stories. It was one of the only stories out there. Ulrich Hahn printed this like mad, and people copied him. There were multiple versions of what Ulrich Hahn initially called Geschichte Draculaweide, printed throughout the German-speaking world, which reached all across Europe. This was one of the first stories ever to reach a pan-European audience. And that's where Dracula came in. Notice the rapid succession of events here. 20 years ago, the printing press gets invented. 10 years ago, the printing press comes to Vienna, and now suddenly you get this story about this prince, well, voivode, but, kind of in charge of a princedom, who has committed these atrocities, so we learn, and who is a traitor to Christendom, and who you can now attack. This thing spread like wildfire because there was nothing else like it, because people hadn't heard of it yet. So that's how the story of Dracula spread. It wasn't that Dracula was this amazing thing, Vlad Tepes was this never before seen thing, but rather he arrived at a time when it suddenly became possible to share these stories, to create this pan-European network of shared stories that people could relate to each other, creating yardsticks for cruelty, for gruesomeness in leaders. And the interesting thing was that, I said artists. Ulrich Hahn was joined by another man telling stories, a man who probably stole all his ideas from Hahn, but who worked in a very different medium. And his name was Michael Beheim. I'm here in the oldest part of the Hofburg, the Imperial Palace in Vienna, because the other artist who told the story of Vlad the Impaler was a Minnesänger, which was basically just a German word for court musician. And he, Michael Beheim, probably just read Ulrich Hahn's pamphlet, and he composed a song based on it, which he performed here at the court of the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III in December of 1463. Remember, the dates are so close to each other. 1462, 1463, all of this stuff is happening. Now, after Beheim composed and performed this poem or this song at the imperial court, he later went on to have an illustrious career all over the German-speaking world and performed the song a bunch more. But what was more, Beheim stood at the crossroads between the tradition of Minnesang, court musicians, on the one hand, and Meistergesang, which was a more middle-class version of these performances. Beheim, in other words, was standing at another inflection point in world history. The Renaissance, of course, middle classes started to grow. It was not just the courts who had the money who wanted to listen to this stuff. It was middle-class people. So you can see that the story of Vlad the Impaler emerges into this regional capital from the Balkans, from where it is from, and met, on the one hand, a revolution in technologies, on the other hand, a revolution in the social structure of society, and bled into both of them and became a part of European society going forward. Because that's what Vlad the Impaler became. He was the shorthand for a cruel tyrant for hundreds of years to come. And that's the point where a certain Anglo-Irishman named Bram Stoker picked up on him and turned him into Count Dracula.